You're muted, Darwin. We can't hear you.
Saying that right up front, buddy.
Excellent. You did so good.
Boy, I gotta tell you, if only you heard that introduction.
It was the best.
It was so good, you guys.
Let's try again.
Let's try it. I'll see if I can abbreviate it. So welcome. It is May 14th. It is time for another deep dive on Tuesday. Today we are blessed to have three outstanding individuals. So again, really what I said was outstanding agents, but even more importantly, these are outstanding individuals. So they're here going to share all of their ideas, their techniques, their aspects, wisdom, knowledge, and with advanced listing techniques. Let's take the take. So with that, I turn it over to you, buddy. They're all yours.
Okay, cool. So thanks for having us. It's awesome to be here. Two great agents. So before we dive into anything, there's something that I wanted to lay out first is there's a process that we follow with all agents in our department because the listing presentation itself should be the easiest part of the entire process. So I know a lot of us think, oh, that has to be this big grand presentation type deal. But in reality, if we follow the process correctly, the listing presentation's main purpose is to serve as go through pricing, establish a price, handle objections, and get a contract signed. So Darwin, can I share my screen?
Yes, you can.
Okay. So I'm going to show you guys something that we follow, which is just a listing appointment set checklist before we do anything and get into the actual appointment. So this listing point checklist. So after you actually you set the appointment, this is what you can follow. And if you want a copy of this, just drop your email address in the group chat and I'll send it to you after we're done. So the first thing that our agents do is they send out a pre-listing package. So that includes all the information they're going to go over, all the paperwork, a broad view of the comparables, their client testimonials, their company information, so on and so forth. So that gets sent out after the bona fide listing appointment is actually set. Then we do something called pre-qualifying. So we actually pre-qualify the day of the appointment, which that essentially is just going through a series of questions to make sure that we're all on the same page. All decision makers are going to be there. We know what price they want to list at. We know what price they don't want to go below. All that's already established up front. So we bring those notes to the actual listing appointment, bring all the paperwork, bring our CMA, bring our seller's net sheet. So if you're not bringing a seller's net sheet, I encourage you to do so because that gives the sellers a really large view of what it is they're going to be walking away from the sale with if they sold at certain price. And I myself use ATA because that gives you the option to use 3 different sales prices and that breaks it down in more of a range so they get an idea of what they're looking at. Bring company information, past client reviews, all marketing material. And then lastly, you want to show up 10 to 15 minutes early. That doesn't mean just go walk in the door 10, 15 minutes early, but get in the driveway, go through your folder, go through your comparables, go through your paperwork, make sure everything's organized. So when you walk up to the door, you're prepared. And so the first thing that we actually do is something called, we just tour the home. So we're going to walk through the home, get an idea of what the home has to offer, get an idea of what it is they want to show us. That's one of the best ways and the quickest ways to build rapport because we essentially want to go through the house through the buyer's perspective. And you're going to hear us say that a lot. So who determines the value? The buyer, right? So that's what this whole presentation is all about. And Dawn and Jim are the two, I would say, strongest agents that have this down to a T and they follow it almost verbatim. I know Jim does. And he has different strategies along with Dawn, and they're going to share those with you today. So I would say first, Dawn, why don't you kind of share about how it is you did your listing presentation prior to us starting to work together like 5 years ago, and how do you do it now, and how is it different?
Am I muted?
No, you're good.
Good morning, everybody. So I actually, when I originally started, like most of us, I did mine more from the appraisal perspective. So I would basically pull comparables and do this huge market analysis. It would take up 8 pages, an hour to go through. And I would have my clients engaged for about 5 minutes of it. And then I would see them start to kind of fade off into the distance and realized something was not adding up, where I wasn't getting them engaged. I was spending too much time on things that weren't important to them. So I had to change my strategy a little bit on how I handled that part of it, at least, and I would come with so much documentation, so much paperwork, and I wasn't really answering the questions that my sellers had when I was out there. I was more worried about giving them everything. So that's how I initially did it. I don't know if you want me to go into anything else yet, but
No, I
that's
mean,
how I
that's,
initially did it.
that's a great point, right? Because we all have this put together presentation, this canned presentation that we're going out there to present based upon what it is that we think they want to see, right? But in reality, it shouldn't be, we should never present the way that we want to be presented to, which we often make the mistake of. We build our presentation based on how we think we'd want to be presented to. It needs to be based upon who we're presenting to actually. So the principles and the system stays the same, but you have to adapt the delivery based upon who it is you're presenting to and how they communicate. So Jim, I know a lot of your work comes into preparation, setting expectations, going into a lot of detail about something called leverage. So you kind of want to touch on that and how you go about your process?
Sure. So you want to, like when I sit down at the table with them, some of the things that I do.
Yeah, so we're at the table. We've toured the house. We've answered some questions, and now it's game time. You're actually sitting down and presenting.
Yeah. So when I actually sit down, I say once we've narrowed it down to, it has to do with determining a price, pricing the home. They've agreed they're going to list with me, all of that. And so I said, great. So there's before we look at some comparables, we need to understand some things about how keys to properly pricing a home. And so I first of all start talking about understanding. There's three key things we need to understand and one thing that we need to remember. So I just started into, first of all, we have to understand the current market. And so I pull out like all MLS comp or info from InfoSparks there in the MLS that we have access to, and kind of go through that, go through our county, talk about just kind of what's going on in the market, days on the market, all that kind of stuff. And then I talk about how I ask them, do you understand how buyers determine value? And then we talk about that, how they do comparison shopping and both in seeing homes and ones that come in from their agent and all of that. And we talk about that at the end of the day, a home's going to sell for what buyers think it's worth. And so we have to understand that they're looking at the benefits and features of one home compared to another. So I go into all that and help them understand some things about that. And then I say, do you understand how leverage works? And usually these questions are, they're like, no, I don't understand. So talk about how leverage works by, I explain that if we have a lot of showings, a lot of interest in a short period of time, especially we have offers that come on the table in a short period of time, then you're in the driver's seat because now you're the one that has the control over, it's not the buyers. But if we have days on the market, if we have those kinds of things building up over time, that starts to work against you. If you have to do price drops, now you're just hoping to have one offer come in, and now all the buyers have the leverage. So I help them understand that by properly pricing the home and going at or even below market value, buyers are going to push it up, especially in this market, because it's still a seller's market. They're going to push it up to what they think it's worth. And I've seen this happen over and over again. And I could show you examples. If I did a screen share of, I show them, I actually sit down and show them from past clients when I have 3, 4, 5, 7, 10, whatever offers on a prior property. And I show them how leverage has worked in the past. And all of a sudden the light bulb comes on. So when we get into looking at comparables and then into pricing, over and over again, they've bought into a strategy that is not start way too high, but start down and let buyers push it up.
Yeah. And I hold on to that demonstration because I want to go through that, but that's a big part I wanted to make sure that we touched on, which is leverage. So what that essentially means is the leverage conversation combats the conversation of can we start high and come down in price? Because a lot of sellers out there right now think, hey, we're in a seller's market. There's no inventory. Let me ask 10, 15, $20,000 more than what I may get because there's nothing to choose from. So demand's going to drive it up. Well, what we need to keep in mind is leverage in the negotiation. So what happens is when you decide to start high and come down in price, you're immediately sacrificing all of your negotiation power and your leverage over to the buyer side. Because what can happen is when you start high and you come down in price is you sit, you accumulate days on market, you have to do price adjustments. And in this market, if a home's not selling in the first couple of weeks, even 30 days, a buyer is going to ask, okay, what's wrong with it? Why is it not selling, right? Now the negotiation power swings over from the seller to the buyer because they can argue the fact that, hey, you've been sitting for a month, you've been sitting for 60 days, 45 days, whatever it is. Now I don't have to offer you as what you're asking because I know I don't have as much competition as a buyer because your property is now stale. So that can essentially be the kiss of death to a seller. Yes, you want to capitalize on the market. Yes, you want to get full market value for it, but you also don't want to overvalue and overprice it because you are deleveraging yourself from a seller's position. Okay, so that's just setting the stage up front. And they're talking about some things regarding our process. So I just want to go through this real quick so you get an idea of what kind of our process looks like. And if you dropped your email, I'll send this to you too. But essentially what we're looking at as an overview is before we present, which is what that appointment set checklist was right there. But just some things you got to keep in mind. Just know sellers will look you up in advance. So if you are not present on your Zillow reviews, your Google reviews, or any other client reviews, if you don't have them up, they're going to look for you. And they're probably going to look on Zillow and Google. And I know Jim has made a constant effort to increase the Google presence on his page. And he's had people reach out to him recently. And he just closed a deal from a Google lead. So Google and Zillow seem to be the two main ones you wanted to drive traffic to for client reviews. They're gonna watch you pull in the driveway. So once you pull up in the driveway, they're gonna notice, is your car clean? Do you have dirt on it, right? Are you dressed properly? Do your clothes fit? Are they pressed, right? Or do you have wrinkles? Is your hair combed? Like all of that stuff is gonna come into play. I know it's small, minor details, but that's what separates the average from the great. And whether we like it or not, people come up with their first impression within the first 5 seconds of looking at you. Okay. How you walk up to the door. Are you walking up there kind of nervous and shaking and fumbling papers or, having your folder falling over the place? No, you walk up calm, cool, confident, 5 to 10 minutes early, knock on the door, shake their hand firmly, look them right in the eye and say, thank you so much for having me over. I appreciate the opportunity. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'd love to see the house. Would you mind if I took a look at it? Right. So then you go in, take a tour of the house, and then you actually sit down at the kitchen table. So this is a big one that I don't think a lot of us spend enough time on, which all my agents go through this during listing presentation mastery, is the actual positioning that you take at the listing appointment. So if you're sitting at a kitchen table, which you should, because most of the family decisions happen at the kitchen table, is you are sitting at the head of the table, and then you have seller next to each other on the same side. We don't want to sit across from them because subconsciously that puts a barrier between us. Okay. And it's also harder for us to go through things and show them stuff. So you sit at the head of the table, the seller sits next to each other on the same side. So that way they get the impression up front that we are on the same team. We're in this together. It is not a you versus me situation. It's not an adversarial situation. We're on the same team. Okay. So we already talked about doing this, and Jim alluded to something called the 1-minute listing presentation. So in our listing presentation script, which I believe is the best script that we have, it's ironclad. We've run through it and it's pretty polished. We start off our presentation after reviewing is, okay, so Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I have 3 quick questions for you. Number 1, we definitely want to get this home sold, right? And we're nodding when we ask that question. Yes, we definitely want to get it sold, right? And we want to price this. We want to list this at a price that's going to cause it to sell because we don't want to sit on the market for a long period of time, right? So we're establishing up front that they want to sell it. They're going to list it at a price that's going to cause it to sell. And then finally, Jim's favorite, would you like me to handle the sale for you? Of course you would, right? So would you like me to handle the sale for you? Yes, you would. And you're looking them right in the eye and shaking their head yes when you say that. Okay. So now you've set the expectation up front. Now, the reason why we asked that last question is 1, because I want to know if you want me to list it up front. And if they say yes, then your job is the easy presentation. But more often than not, that question is designed to draw an objection as to what their decision-making factor is. So for example, if you ask that question, would you like me to handle the sale for you? And they say 9 times out of 10, well, I don't know. It depends on what you have to say about pricing. Well, I don't know. It depends on what your commission is, whatever. Those are the 2 most common ones, but 9 times out of 10, it's going to be price. So now, okay, now I know what their decision-making factor is price. So your response should sound something like this. Great. So it sounds like pricing is important to you. So if we're able to agree upon a price tonight that makes sense for all of us and you're happy with what you see, would you then be open to listing the home with me today? Yes? Great. So now it sounds like all we have to do is address the pricing. So you set the expectation up front. They want to sell the house. They want to list it to sell. So when you get to the conversation of the actual pricing, you can revert back and say, hey, I know when we first sat down, you told me you want to list this to sell. You don't want to sit in a long period of time. That expectation has been set up front, which is going to make your closing on the back end easier on the price. And then you just proceed to the actual CMA. So I like to bring active, pending, and solds. So active gives us an indication of what the current competition is, who we're going to be competing with when we list. Pending allows us to see what asking price generated an offer. Now, we don't know what it sold for, but we know what list price generated an offer, and then sold comps, because obviously that gives us the best indication of value because it made it through the entire process, it appraised, and it's closed. All within the last 6 months. And I'm a big believer in this. It's better to go back further in time than it is to go back further out in radius. So if you're in a rural area like Lapeer, I know Jim and I have gone through this many times, is where we'd rather go back further than 6 months than go further out in radius and diameter. Like, I'd rather you keep it to your local area if you can and just go further back in time if you're having a hard time finding comps than expanding your search, because once you get too far out, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 miles, then you're starting to look at a different area and that can impact value. Bring 3 to 5 comparables with you. 3 to 4 is kind of the sweet spot. Really, anything over 4 can be overwhelming. 3 is good. If you can get 1 active, 1 pending, 1 sold, or 1 active and 2 sold. 3 to 4 is kind of the sweet spot. Anything over that is too overbearing and people get lost. Like Dawn was saying, she did like an appraisal and then you lose them after the first 5 minutes. Keep the sellers involved as much as possible. Okay. So one of the verbiage that we use that's in our script is, once you go through each comparable, you're going to ask the seller, so how do you feel this home that we're looking at compares to yours? Do you think this home is more valuable than yours? Do you think it's less valuable than yours? Or do you think it's the same as yours? So if you do that for all 3 to 4 comparables that you go through, by the actual end of the presentation, you should have 3 piles in front of them. You should have the less valuable pile, you should have the same as pile, and you should have the more valuable pile. Now it should become very clear where they need to be at pricing wise, and it's all based upon what they told you, not what we told them. They indicated the value based upon comparison each comparable to their home in value. After you've established the price, you close. So just a couple reminders, and I'm going to kick it over to Dawn and Jim to hear more about what they do personally. Is you are in control of the entire presentation. By the time you show up and actually knock on the door and walk in the house, you should be in control. You want everything to seem like slow motion. So whenever we're stressed or we're anxious or we're nervous, everything starts to speed up, right? You want to slow everything down. You want to take your time. You want to be in ultimate control. And the only way to be in ultimate control and be comfortable and confident doing this is to role play and practice this over and over and over again with an agent in your office. Sellers should be telling us the price, which Dawn and Jim will get into how do we do that. You may have to close 3 to 4 times to get an actual signature, which is normal. Ask, don't tell. And this last one, which should give you a confidence boost and also put things into perspective. You are interviewing them just as much as they're interviewing you. So some people may not be a good fit for us. Some people just may not do business the way that we do business. Some people just maybe a personality clash, which we all run into. And sometimes you just have to say, you know what, I appreciate it. I don't think we're the right fit. I wish you the best of luck, but I don't think I'm the agent for you. So I know we've kind of got into the setup of things, but Dawn, maybe why don't you touch on, okay, I know you changed how you present your CMA. How do you get the sellers to actually tell you the price, and how do you actually close for a contract?
Sure. Am I unmuted? Okay.
Yeah, good.
So first of all, I just wanted to say something that you brought up. When I'm on an appointment, when I'm booking an appointment, I always make sure before I hang up the phone, and I do this for a couple reasons, to ask them if you could pick your dream number, doesn't matter what it is, even if you say $1 million, what is that number that you would put this house at in your dream? Because I want to know how far off we are. I want to know that if I am going to walk into this house and I say, I know in my heart of hearts, it's only worth 500,000, and they're going to come back at me and say 700,000. I want to know that up front. So that's the first thing I do before I even book when I book the time and day that I'm going to meet with them. But then once I actually get there, and this is a strategy I've used for a long time because I don't even know how I started it, but it became very effective, is when I fill out my exclusive right to sell. I basically will take the exclusive right to sell and I will ask them, let's say this is the number that we're going to put on your listing. Now I've gone through my comparables in a different fashion now. Now how I do my comparables is a little bit different than how I did them when I started, thanks to Alex and Darwin, because now I'm keeping them engaged, but I'm giving them straight facts. Just like Alex said, I have the less than, equal to, better than piles, right? They've determined those based on me sharing with them the information. And I tell them right up front that I am just an educator in this. So I'm not here to give them a price. I'm here to educate them on the market, and they're going to make that decision. Once I've done that, I take the exclusive right to sell and say, do me a favor, based on the conversation that we had and the education that you received, what number do you want to see? And I slide the exclusive right to sell over to them, and then I just shut up. And I sit there quietly because that's where we get nervous and want to say, but if you think this number, that's where you need to let them make that decision. More often than not, based on us and me guiding them through it, like, hey, do you think this one's less, more, equal? They know what that number is now. They're very, very savvy. They probably knew that number before I walked in the door, but they're trying to get me to prove them higher. And I have them write that number on the contract. And almost every time, even if they won't verbally tell me that number, they will write it on the contract. For some reason, it's something about it that they will do. So I take that then and say, well, it sounds like you've made a pretty good decision based on what we've talked about. Now, if they're out of line, which I've had happen a few times, I will ask them, can you share with me why you chose that number based on what we talked about? Because then I want to have that reality check with them. But once they put that number on the contract and I've agreed to it, the next thing is, let's get this signed. It sounds like we're on the same page. It sounds like I can actually help you achieve what your goal is if that's the number that you wrote. So I'm going to have you sign this document and then we'll go through the rest of the paperwork.
So she goes through the actual comparables, and once they've seemed to narrow down a price, she slides the exclusive right to sell over the table and has them write in the price right there, and they actually just closed on themselves. So you don't even have to ask for a signature. But she also brought up a good point to where if the seller is a little too ambitious with the price and they think it's worth more than it is, that's a conversation you have to have. So, okay, so help me understand. That's a big one. Help me understand why it is you think that your home should be listed at 550 when we're seeing 500 should be the price or whatever it is, right? Just have them pretty much educate you as to why, because I have to sell this to buyers and buyers agents. So essentially you kind of want the seller to try and sell you onto why that price is justified. And sometimes it is, but more often than not, it's not. And as opposed to saying, no, that price is way too high, it's never going to work, because their natural reaction is to fight you on that, is to ask them to help you understand why they think that price should be where it is.
Well, the other part of that, Alex, too, is if I have that conversation with them and they are absolutely under no circumstances going to bring that price down to what I think it should be at, even though I haven't given them a number, I've now opened up the opportunity that in 2 weeks, I mean, I'm not taking a crazy overpriced listing, but in 2 weeks, if I have one that's off, I can say, if you remember when we sat down and had this conversation and we shared these comps that I'm now going to show you again, this number is where we feel you would have the most effective opportunity at selling. So I've now reiterated that to them after their idea didn't pan out. And it gives me the leverage to say, I think now it's an opportunity for us to correct this, to adjust it.
So you have that conversation at the initial listing appointment. Do you write anything in the actual contract stating that they're willing to adjust the price?
And I will tell you, I used to be a big proponent of that, like right in there, that in 2 weeks, I'm going to change it. The reason I don't do that anymore is I felt like it made my confidence waver. You know, now they're already going, gosh, she's not even confident with what she's putting on the market, and she's telling me that up front. So I know in my head, I'm going to have that conversation in 2 weeks, likely. The other thing is, if an appraisal comes in low, I want to be able to say, if you remember correctly, when we sat down, this was the number that we really were able to target that really effectively fit you. But obviously, you know, now it's come out with an appraisal that is the number that we really needed to target. So we need to be aware of that. Because and it's the same reason we don't tell people a price, as you guys all know this. I certainly don't have a crystal ball. And if I tell somebody a number, 500,000 is the number for your house and it appraises for 450, that's my responsibility. That is on me. So I really stray, and I used to give the price all the time. I mean, I used to be like, no, I think you could get this for it. And now I will absolutely walk out the door before I will give them a price. I won't do it because it's too much risk. You know, it's too much risk on us as agents and on, you know, even on our sellers to not have made that decision. They don't have any buy-in. They're not invested in that number in any way, shape, or form if I haven't given them the opportunity to select and do that.
I like it. I like it. So you just heard Dawn give there's 3 techniques to talking a seller into
Doubled.
an accurate price. And Dawn just gave 2 of them. One is the appraisal conversation. And now Jim is going to give us the other one, which he really leans into, which is a leverage conversation. And then there's a third one, which I'll hit at the end. So 3 techniques talking a seller into pricing. One is appraisal, Dawn hit. Jim is going to hit leverage. And then I'll give you the third one after Jim. So Jim, do you want to dive more into that and maybe show off that example that you were talking about?
Sure. Yeah. Let me share my screen if I can. Darwin can give me the go ahead on that.
I think you should be good.
All right. There we go. So can you see my screen there?
Yep.
Alex,
Yep.
are we good?
We're good.
Yeah. So one of the things that I do is I use prior examples and summaries of how leverage works. This is a house I listed a while back last fall. And we had actually a round 2 because we had to go back on the market or go back on the market. And we went back and got original offers freshened up again. But I use these kinds of things when I sit down at the table to show how leverage works. When you have a bunch of offers, you can call for highest and best, especially in this market still. And you can see an offer that you like and say, hey, if you could bring it up to this, we could bring a deal together. And so I just show them like examples, and I lay this out in a paper form. I just bring examples when we get to the leverage conversation. And I just show them like, hey, here's what happened to this. I tell them what we listed it at and what it ended up garnishing in terms of prices. And I just kind of go through 3 or 4 different examples with them. This particular one, I had 28 offers on. We priced it, they brought into the strategy, and we priced it low and it got pushed up $55,000. So again, a home's going to sell for what buyers think it's worth. And when they see that the kind of control that you could be in the driver's wheel instead of giving the leverage to the buyers by starting too high, they just buy into it. And most of the time it sets them up for really pricing a home well. And it just works every time as we have that conversation, most of the times. So anyways,
I would add on too that, you know, Jim is not going into these listing appointments and saying, hey, we got to start really aggressively. Like he's like we talked about, providing options. So we have different strategies when it comes to pricing. It depends on what the seller's motivation is, what their timeline is, how soon they want to get moved, what area it is, how desirable it is, whatever it is. And so he laid out examples, because I know some of you who maybe haven't done the aggressive pricing strategy before, maybe thinking, well, what if a seller says, well, what if I price it too low and I leave money on the table? Right? Well, this is just an option that you can present. And Jim has done this over and over and over again, and he has examples to show them. And then at the end, he asks, okay, so now knowing what you know and seeing what you've seen, what strategy would you like to take? And more often than not, they take the aggressive pricing strategy, right?
Yeah, they have. And sometimes it's created a lot of extra work for me because we get so
Yeah.
many offers coming in. That can be overwhelming. But yeah, when they see how it works, it really helps them. They make the decision, you know, on the price, and usually they make a really good decision on pricing it in a way that's going to get them the highest that they can get, because that's the thing I'm showing them is at the end of the day, you're going to be able to get the highest that you can get, because sometimes we're not sure how much buyers are going to be willing to pay. You know, even though we got experience in the market, it's still, you know, depending on who's out there as buyers at that current time, what's going on, the neighborhood, etc. So that allows us to get that leverage and put them in a winning position. And I've just done that here recently over in Flushing. I got a listing appointment tomorrow, and I'm just going to go through these same things with them to help them price it in a way that makes sense. But once they understand how the market works, what's going on, they buy into it, you know.
Mm-hmm. So that's a second technique, is the leverage conversation. I'll give you the third one in a second, but Jim and Dawn, I'd like to hear your take on this. Do you have a set timeline for a listing to maximize showing value? So for example, do you say like, okay, we're going to do a coming soon on Wednesday, we're going to list it Thursday or Friday, we're going to do an open house Saturday and Sunday, and hopefully do like a highest and best by Monday? Do you guys have like a set schedule that you follow for a listing?
So you want me to keep going here, and then she
Yeah,
can...
yeah. And all the prep work too that you do for your sellers, by the way, getting the house ready and all that.
Yeah, so typically what I've been doing is go coming soon Wednesday and Thursday, and leverage the weekends then as far as active for showings, go active on a Friday. And because that way, you know, typically buyers, I found Friday is a great day to get started for people coming out. You know, usually Fridays get filled up really well, and then into the weekend. And that way you're leveraging the weekend when people are more free to get out and see things. But you got it coming soon, so that way you got a barometer of how are we doing on the pricing. Are we seeing showings getting scheduled, you know, like we're expecting? And as it builds, and it just builds your seller's confidence, like, hey, this is working. Look, I got another one. I got another one. We're up to 10 now. We're up to 15. On this one recently, we got up to 70 showings. That was kind of crazy. And we did all that within a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. But I usually, what I've been doing is saying in the listing in the realtor notes that that seller's not going to be reviewing any offers until Monday, you know, before Monday, whatever date it is. And I just put that in the realtor notes. It sets the expectations right ahead of time, so that we're not getting offers and giving us 24 hours and we want to answer by Saturday night or Friday night. Like, no, we're going to be we're confident in our pricing. We're going to let buyers agents bring out their buyers throughout the weekend. And the soonest we're going to be sitting down is Monday. And I haven't had any agents kick back on that. They're just like, okay, if anything, they just want to make sure like, hey, so if somebody throws over a really good offer before Monday, is your client going to accept it? I'm like, no, we're waiting till Monday. They're worried that maybe they're going to miss out. And as soon as they know that, they're like, okay, fine, sounds good to us. And that way it puts us in the driver's seat. And then as the weekend progresses, if we get 2, 3, 4, usually I wait till we get 3 or 4 offers to really call for highest and best per se, but then we set a time for like Monday at noon or 2 o'clock or whatever. I want to make sure I have time to review offers, get them prepared so I can present everything in a summary fashion to my clients and be sitting down Monday afternoon or possibly Monday evening, depending on the situation. But that way it also takes out the worry, the stress for the buyers and the agents. Like, we got to get out there because maybe somebody else is going to snatch us up right away. So it kind of calms everybody down, puts us in the driver's seat. And us as agents, it just, sometimes I think we drive ourselves into the ground. Like let's just let people see things. And then on Monday, business day, it also gives me a chance to call lenders Monday morning. If I have questions, and I'm not bothering them during the weekend, call them, and especially top offers, finding out like, hey, what's the strength of your buyers, things like that. And really just come prepared to sit down at the table with, laying out in front of them what I showed them we could end up doing by showing them prior examples. Here we are sitting down and doing that. And my sellers are just thrilled, with being able to do that. And so I think setting the expectations right away and putting ourselves in the driver's seat, and we just write that right into the contract that, the listing contract, that we're not gonna look at anything before Monday.
Do you
So
set the
usually by
expectations
Monday
up?
evening, usually by Monday evening, we're under contract and, it's going pending.
So you set the expectation up front. All the agents are aware of it. So no bully offers, no, hey, give me an answer in 24 hours. That way people can go out there and see it. They know what to expect. And then, Monday, get them in, you get a chance to talk to your lenders. And if you saw his spreadsheet, that's how he presents all his offers. He puts all his offers in that spreadsheet, in that Excel sheet, presents it to the seller so they can see exactly who's writing the offer, how much is it, what's the EMD, what's the percentage down, who's the lender, all that stuff. And that way it makes it easy as possible for the seller to make a decision. Dawn, do you have a set game plan that you follow for a listing before you set it live?
Yeah, so on mine, I do something very similar to Jim in the sense that I do my spreadsheet for multiple offers, partially for me so that I can stay organized, but also so that my sellers, can see everything laid out and compare. So mine's
Yes.
not as fancy as yours though, unfortunately, but mine is very simple, right down to how much is the EMD, how much is the, how many days after closing. Very simple for them to see because they don't know the terminology. That's our job, right? But as far as setting up my listing, I do something similar as far as coming soon. I love coming soons. And the main reason is I will have people just sharing it, and it's getting out there. And that's all I care about for that. I don't necessarily need to have 10 appointments pre-booked. I like to know that people are sharing it on social media and it's starting to gain traction. I do Fridays for starting my weekend, of course. I do not put a deadline, or a minimum deadline, I should say. And the only reason, and this is obviously, it's working great for you, so it's just a personal preference thing on my end, is I don't like to, I don't want to have people waiting until Sunday to see it or Monday. I really like to just let it flow, let them get in there. If they want to write me a crazy offer on a Saturday, that does not mean my client's accepting it on Saturday. And if they put a 24-hour deadline and I have to share with them that we're not doing that, I would prefer that so that I can get multiple offers. And I also don't, just like Jim said, I don't put a highest and best until I have at least a few offers, at least 3 offers, because you always get the phone calls that offers are coming, they're coming, and you don't get them. So I like to leverage it as this is an open and available property, write me your best. And then when I do that, I tend to see a lot more activity coming through. Whereas when I start to put rules and regulations around things, some agents won't entertain it. Some agents, even a highest and best, as soon as I put it, I see people canceling showings and things like that. They're like, we don't want to compete. We're not doing all that. So I try to wait to do that till like the last step, the last minute that I can put in a highest and best. But with my sellers, I set very strict expectations. So with my sellers, it is, we are selling this home. We need to accommodate showings. Basically, you need to allow me the first weekend to just be for me. I want to be able to do open houses. I want to be able to get as many people in there. So take the dog, take the kids, and go. And as long as I set that up front, so they know that that's kind of the expectation, then I usually don't have a problem. It's when they don't know and they say, wait a minute, I can't accommodate a showing at 5 o'clock. I have a dog. Like, we need to be really clear with them. So more so my expectations are set with my actual client.
Hmm.
So
Interesting. So there you have it. That's a timeline you guys can follow. It's very similar. And so they both went through the appraisal conversation, the leverage conversation when it comes to talking down a seller and price. The third one, which is, I think, one of the most effective, which is the emotional component of it, which is the buyer's perspective. Okay. So what that means is, okay, a seller is of course going to be biased because it's their home, right? They think their home is worth more than it is because they live there and they've taken care of it. And that's just natural bias. So what we want to do during the pricing conversation is to remove that emotional bias. And the best way to do that is to really get them to look through the lens of the buyer. So how you can do that is say, okay, let's take a step back. Let's remove the seller's hat. And let's say that you wanted to buy your house. Okay. You don't own it. You want to buy it. And before we write up an offer, we looked at the comparables in the neighborhood. We see that one has sold for 300,000. We sold one for 305. And then we saw one that sold for 308. Now these sellers are asking 325. Now, would you as a buyer, now knowing that the highest sold comparable in that neighborhood closed for 308,000, would you as a buyer feel comfortable paying 325? The only logical answer is no, of course not, right? So now that is why I'm asking you that, because we really have to look at it through the lens of the buyer and remove the emotion from it, which can be difficult, but that's why we start the whole conversation off. That's why we started this whole call off with who determines the value? The buyer. It's not the seller. It's not us. It's the buyer. And like Dawn said, it's not our job to come in here and tell you what your home's value is. Our job is to give you information, to educate you on the process. And ultimately, you as a seller have to come up with the price, which is why we talk about the seller telling us the price, and the way that we deliver it is that we make it as simple and easy as possible for the sellers to do that. So,
Alex, sorry,
yeah,
didn't want to interrupt, but it was a good segue. The other thing I do, and I'm sure a lot of you do this, and I've been really adamant about it in this market, is when I'm walking through the house now, to make sure they know I'm walking through the eyes of a buyer. Because the one thing that I try to minimize, and I know we all do this different because it's always been a topic of conversation, is updates, cleaning, painting, things like that. I try to minimize as much of that as I can from my seller, but I want to make sure that they know up front that I'm walking through as a buyer. So I'm going to tell you what I see. I'm going to be very clear. Like, the first thing I noticed when I walked in is your front door was dirty. Your window was dirty. Like, I noticed that. I'm going to tell you about it. And that way, those are the minor things you can fix. But then I also have clients who are like, well, if I redo the kitchen with that, and to me, that's where I also say, well, as a buyer, I might not like what you do. And now you're going to spend $20,000. You're not going to make that $20,000 back. You know, those types of things are where I just make it really clear that I am walking through this house as a buyer when I do my walkthrough, so that I can give them what, and I'm pretty critical about that stuff, because I know the first thing I notice when I walk in is, are the floors clean? Are the windows clean? Like, I know those are things a buyer's looking at, because then they're going to go, if those things aren't clean, what else has been deferred in this house? And that's your first impression. So,
absolutely. Absolutely. So now, hearing what they've been doing, do you think they have any issue fighting for their value of 6% commission
no,
based upon the value that they have to offer, the way they operate, the customer service that they offer? So let's just dive into that, because I know that's always a conversation that we have. How do you handle the, will you cut your commission objection, or I have a limited service agreement option that I can do where I pay a couple $100 in the MLS, or I got so-and-so that's going to do it for 4%. How do you guys handle it?
do you want me to go, Jim, or you want to go?
Sure, go ahead.
So for me, it's very simple. And not to sound like I'm, so great at just saying, no, I'm not going to do that. I talk through it with them, but I am very clear on where my value lies, which is not necessarily just going in and staging a home or getting my photographer out there to take pictures. My real value is in the network I've built, the negotiation that I offer, and getting a deal to the table. So when I look at what and I like to use my sales history with my clients too. like, I haven't been able to sell this many houses or close this many deals or get this many of my clients to their next happy place unless what I'm offering is the service to do that. So I use that as my leverage to say, I've sold this amount of homes because I've gotten them from A to B and been able to do that successfully this many times. And that's how I leverage, like, that's why my commission from the first client I had to you will not change.
I like it. Jim?
Well, and I say some of the same things, but also just helping them, well, do you understand how that could hurt you as a seller? And they're like, well, no, well, and I explained how a lot of, there's agents out there like myself that have a contract for 3% as a buyer's agent, and that's what I've been doing for years. And I said, so you're going to force those buyers to make up the difference, which that's going to be a conversation that's going to be even stronger with the new NAR thing that's coming here, because agents are going to be doing a contract like they should have been doing all along, and showing their value and asking for that 3% as a buyer's agent. So that's definitely going to even be a stronger conversation going forward, I think, with sellers, that now you're asking them on top of all their other things to make up the difference for their buyer's agent. And so that's a conversation I've had with them as well. To make, it's basically going to make their home more marketable and help them get the most that they can for their home by appealing out there and not putting on the buyers to make up the difference, and to motivate those agents to work hard to get their clients to write an offer.
Yep.
So
exactly
once I had
right.
that conversation with them, I mean, and a lot of my business comes through my sphere of influence, not all of it, but you know, they want to see me taken care of too, you know, and I want clients that are going to respect my value too. And if they don't, I just had a seller. She was very difficult to work with. The closing was very stressful, and I still wanted to try to help her. But when I had a meeting with her, she wasn't going to sign a contract and wasn't going to be committed. And I just said, well, I'm sorry, I'm not going to be able to help you on this side. I would love to be able to help you, but there was also other stress going on here that it wasn't healthy for me or for her. That's a whole nother conversation. But, you know, we have value that we're bringing to the table, and we work hard. I work hard for my clients. So if they're not willing to buy into that, I'm okay with that. But, you know, I think, you know, standing up for your value in your heart and the way you present yourself and what you're bringing to the table, most of the time they're just going to go with it and understand that they're getting the value that they're looking for
When they see the value, right? So if we have a situation where we may not feel comfortable or confident that we should be getting 6%, then we got to take a look at our internal value proposition that we're offering, because it's clearly not strong enough to give us the confidence to be willing to ask for 6%. So a little bit different than these guys. I built my business on for sale by owners, where I had to fight for every single 1 freaking percent on every single appointment. And I was in constant competition every single appointment that I went on. So whether it's a for sale by owner or sphere of influence or whatever, the main principle of the seller asking for you to cut their commissions because they think they will increase their bottom line if they do so. That's the only thing that they see. They don't see the potential negative outcomes of that, which Jim and Dawn both alluded to, which is you taking a back seat to your competition regarding your marketing. And you can draw it out real simple. Just grab a yellow pad of paper and draw 2 squares, right? So you have this house that's offering out the full 3%. Then you have your house, which you're offering out 2.5%, 2%, or whatever it is. Which house do you think that buyer's agent is going to want to show first? Okay, so not only are you driving traffic to your competition by offering out less compensation, but like Jim and Dawn both said, is now we have to have a buyer agency contract signed. And in those buyer agency contracts, more often than not, it's going to state that that agent is owed 3%. So if you're dealing with a buyer who is scrimping and scrapping and everything they can, and they have to go over asking, they have to pay their closing costs, they have to pay their appraisal, they have to pay their inspection. Now you're asking them to pay an extra $1,000, $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 just to buy your house to make up the difference in commission when they can go buy your neighbor's house down the street and not have to pay any of the commission? I mean, do you really think that's going to achieve your end goal, which is to increase your bottom line number as much as possible? Or do you think that's going to hurt your marketing and your value and cause you to sit and essentially help you sell your neighbor's house?
Mhm.
So that's the conversation we have to have. We almost never appeal to the self-interest of the seller. We immediately go to justifying our value, which is warranted. We should justify our value and show them why we owe 6%. But you also have to appeal to the self-interest of the seller, because that's what they're going to listen to, is how they're going to be affected directly via the lack of marketing, taking the backseat to their competition, and ultimately charging a buyer a premium just to buy their house.
And I would say too, that if we cut this down, I'd put out a lot of money for marketing, professional photography, all of this stuff, and I would need to drop back on that, and that could hurt your marketability. Is that something that you would want?
Yep.
And
Yep.
100% of the time, they're like, no, I want that, because I'm putting out money for this stuff. I'm not just using my camera and going around. So I want them to know that you're getting value here for all that. Once they see that, I hardly ever have any kind of pushback.
Yeah. And fear of loss is a great motivator. So, okay, this is the 6% plan that I showed you, which you want that, but you don't want to pay 5%. So what would you like me to sacrifice? What would you like me to eliminate from this? Because you can't get 6% premium service for a 5% price. That's just the way it goes. So we got about 7 more minutes left. Is there anything else you guys wanted to touch on? Does anybody have any questions about anything we talked about?
I've been watching
Jim?
what comes up in the chat. No questions. We're in there yet.
So that means we either did a really good job or we did a really bad job. So
I think, Alex, another thing, I'm sure Don does this too. You know, when I go through the home, I've had buyers or sellers that want to walk with me, and I always say, hey, I'd like to go through by myself to look at it from a buyer's perspective, because the minute they start talking and things like that, I'm going to be missing things that might be important for me to come back to later on to share with them about things that could help your home. Usually not a lot of money thing, but just some elbow grease and time and energy to get it set up the best that we can. And a lot of times I'll just take snapshots as I go through, so that when I actually get to that point, I can go through and say, here's this, this, and this, here's some, suggestions that I have. And then I give them a list of pre-shoot checklist things to, set them up for the best photography that we can come up with. And one of the things I have been doing is showing up at least a half hour early, because to make sure things are set up like I want for the photography there, because a lot of times they're missing a lot of things. And for me to get there early and just say, hey, I want to get you the best value that I can. So I'm going to go through here because I want to get you the best bottom line number. That's what you want, right? And you kind of have that conversation with them, because sometimes they're like, well, didn't I do a good job? But you just set them up like, hey, I'm the professional. I see homes all the times and look at pictures all the time. So I know what's going to really help here. And they
Mhm.
So
buy
there
into
better
it.
not be any toilet seats left up in your pictures, Jim.
Right. Things like that. Yep. Lights on. Lights should be on. I always tell them, make sure you buy. Yeah, check out my pic. But like even getting light bulbs put in so they don't have light bulbs that are out and things like that. Just help the pictures look way better in the end. And they don't think about those things. But I always give them advice to make sure that, because I'm putting a lot of money into the photography, I want it to look the best that it can and showcase this home.
Yep. That's
Yeah, I
6%
think-
service.
Yeah, and then that's the key. I think for us, all of us, everybody on the call and everybody in the industry, if we can continue to show our value, which is things like what Jim is saying, that's going to set the precedence. Not everything else, not the people who are discounting their commission, but the people who are really out there doing it like we do every day and doing what I would consider to be a great job. Then though that becomes the precedence. And when I go in, I'm very confident to say, and it sounds like, to you guys, it may not sound as appealing, but to a seller to say, I am really good at my job. I take tremendous pride in it. And I want to display you in the best way possible. And I want your future referrals. I want you to trust me. So in that way, they know how hard you're willing to work for them. And that's what I want out there. That's why when my reviews, what I do at a closing table, I send them a Google link right at the closing table and say, can you take a few minutes while they're making copies and fill out your review? I wouldn't feel confident doing that had I not done a good job on the actual sale of their home, whether it's a buyer or seller. So for me to do that, and I think you guys should all be doing it, it speaks volumes for your level of confidence in the service you've offered them. So.
And I always ask them at the closing table. So hopefully I've given you 5-star service. I want to know what they're thinking.
Right.
Yeah,
I
just to make
know,
sure.
I always know going into it, but I like them.
Yeah, there's
to
a
hear them
few
say,
that I'm like, you know what, they're not getting that link. I'm just going to hold that one back. You're challenging one, Jim, from the beginning. She probably didn't get that link, did you?
Mm-mm.
I know, because she was just, yeah, even I did ask her and she said, yes, she gave me 5-star service. But at the same time, it
You
was
don't
just so
know.
stressful.
She's a loose cannon.
Yeah. But yeah, just having that conversation. Oh yeah, Jim, you have blah, blah, blah. And then, well, great. One of the ways you can help me promote my business, and it's very important to me, is to talk about the reviews. Yeah.
Yeah. And I have a link that I actually saved into my notes because for the life of me, I could not figure out any better way to do it. So I saved it into my notes screen and I literally will text them at the table and have them do it while they're making copies because, they leave, they're turning in, property exemptions, they're moving, and then they forget, and then you're really trying to track them down. So I like to do it right there and they'll say, oh, it's all done. And I'll see it pop up and I'm like, thank you so much. So, and they don't mind. If you've done a good job, they don't mind. So.
Alex, can we go ahead and do a wrap up? Because I think what I'd love to do is, because you and Dawn, both coaches, why don't you give everybody a little bit about what's available to them if they're really looking to be able to really enhance their skills in growing their business using, these advanced listing techniques? How can they really grasp hold of them?
Yeah. So what you see now with Dawn and Jim, I mean, they're incredible rock stars, but at the same time, when they came in 4 or 5 years ago, they were not doing what they're doing now. They were doing it completely different. And so one of the things that we do with coaching is we spend about 2 months on your actual listing presentation, where we call it listing presentation mastery. We have script work, we have communication style preferences, we have closing styles. We help you identify who it is you're sitting across from the table with. We help you identify how to present your CMA, how to close for a contract, how to handle all the objections. And one of the things that we did that Dawn loves so much is we actually do video role plays to where I either come out to your office, you come out to mine, and you present to me as a listing agent. I'm the seller, and we capture it on footage. And we look at the way you present, your energy, your mannerisms, your body language, your eye contact, how it is you're handling objections. Dawn had to do it about 4 or 5 times. I think Jim had to do it 2 or 3 times. But that's how you capture and you tweak and you polish all those things. So by the time you're done with it, you are rock solid as possible. And there is nothing that you're not prepared for. And that's why they do this like they do now. It's like it's natural. It comes out completely just like natural because they've internalized it and they did it years ago. So if that's something you're interested in, that's just one piece of what it is that we do on top of the first part. It's all about how do you generate leads? How do you find off-market leads? How do you do circle prospecting? How do you build your personal social media brand? All of that is circled and encompassed within the first 6 months. So if it's something you're interested in, please email me or text me directly. I'll have Darwin send out my information, and I have all your guys' emails that you dropped in the chat. So I will send you out what I covered today, this afternoon.
And I'll just wrap up then. Know that tomorrow in Troy, we will be doing a buyer boot camp. It is from 10 to 4. If you're not reserved a spot yet, simply call the Troy office, talk with Kelly. She'll put your name down and show up tomorrow. All we need is your body. Friday, I don't know if we have any space left, but up in Lapeer, we're doing the buyer boot camp up there. And guys, I can tell you, if you've never done anything with the buyer education, and come see us, we're going to clear up anything you have regarding the settlements and how that's going to impact us. Lastly, I want to let you know that next week, May 23rd, the Rochester office will be handling or hosting for us the back to the basics, 1 day listing boot camp. And guys, it comes at you like trying to get a drink from a fire hose. But if you enjoyed what you got from these 3 in 1 hour and you want to have the full picture with more time, just call and talk with Sherry at the Rochester office, and she'll put your name down so that you've got that. And with that, guys, I just say they did an outstanding job, did they not?
Yes,
There you go,
sir.
Monahan. There you go. There you go. See, we had a lot of folks here in Lake Orion. But guys, appreciate you. Appreciate what you guys do for the coaching. James, wonderful producer. And again, 3 outstanding individuals willing to be able to give what they know to their competition. So let's have a great week. Enjoy the warm weather and the sunshine, and let's go out. You know what to do. Talk to people. Go sell our house. You're the man. See y'all.